Hello, thanks for clicking on the link. Today, Disability Rights South Dakota will be talking about the various bills that are being discussed in the committees, in the chambers, and throughout the South Dakota legislature here for the week of February 27th. Today, as I record this, it's February 28th, so keep that in mind as we talk about the statuses of these bills. You can see here on the screen, we'll be talking about the presented House bills, Senate bills, and resolutions. Let's get started. House Bill 1010, repeal the sunset date for provisions related to licensure of behavior analysts. In a session law, there were sunset provisions, or otherwise known as a date at which this particular law would stop being in effect. That date was July 1, 2024. House Bill 1010 proposed to eliminate that sunset provision and therefore allow those licensure of behavior analysts and those provisions to move past that. This has moved through the South Dakota legislature and has been signed by the governor. Therefore, those provisions have been eliminated. House Bill 1034. It creates a fund of $450,000 to provide refunds to elderly and disabled persons for real property and sales tax. It also increases income limits for eligibility to receive these funds. House Bill 1034 has gone to the governor, has been signed, and it is going into law. House Bill 1037. Amend the eligibility for admission to the state's veterans home and repeal the residency requirement. This is just a language cleanup. It provides a preference for South Dakota residents to be admitted to the state veterans home, whereas before it was a requirement that you be a resident. So it allows for non-residents to be admitted under certain circumstances. This bill has been sent to the 41st day, therefore it is dead in the legislature. It will not go into law. House Bill 1044. Establish scholarships for individuals pursuing careers in the behavioral health field, to make an appropriation therefore, and to declare an emergency. This bill would appropriate $5 million to administer the fund and $15 million of a scholarship fund to support students pursuing behavioral health careers and professionals entering into the behavioral health field. This bill also goes on to describe the administration of that scholarship as well as eligible fields of study. This bill was heavily amended. In fact, it was hog-housed, basically stripped of all the language and replaced with more specific and detailed language. This bill has been tabled by the Joint Committee on Appropriations. That doesn't necessarily mean that the issue is dead. It just means that it's been set aside, most likely to be discussed in ongoing deliberations of the Appropriations Committee. House Bill 1046, provide free tuition at the Board of Technical Education institutions for children or spouses of members of South Dakota National Guard that were disabled or deceased in the line of duty. This bill has made it all the way through the South Dakota legislature and has been delivered to the governor for her signature or veto. That delivery was made yesterday, so we will see what the governor does with the bill, whether she signs it or decides to veto it. House Bill 1052. Change the eligibility requirements of a property tax relief program for disabled veterans and surviving spouses. This bill was sent to the House Taxation Committee, where it was deferred to the 41st legislative day. House Bill 1078. Make an appropriation to the Department of Human Services for the development and expansion of adult day services programs and to declare an emergency. This bill would appropriate $5 million for grants to DHS for the development and expansion of adult day services that serve adults with dementia or symptoms of dementia. This bill has made it through the House of Representatives and is waiting to cross over to the Senate to be assigned to a committee and discussed there. House Bill 1079. Make an appropriation to the Department of Health to provide grants to support mental health and suicide prevention programs and to declare an emergency. This bill would is an appropriation of $4 million to the South Dakota Department of Health for grant programs directed toward youth and young adults that would provide mental health and suicide prevention, peer support training, community mental health and suicide data services, basically collecting data on these incidents, and suicide loss response planning and support services, supports for survivors, family members of an individual who had committed suicide. This bill has made it through the committees on appropriations and has been sent and passed by the House of Representatives. It will cross over to the Senate for discussion by their committees and chamber. House Bill 1086, create provisions for the psychiatric care collaborative care model to be reimbursable for insurance. This bill has been sent to the 41st day. It was killed by the House Health and Human Services Committee. House Bill 1103, waive the fee for non-driver identification cards for individuals at or below federal poverty level. This bill, too, has been deferred to the 41st day and has been killed in that committee. It will no longer be heard or sent forward through the legislative process. House Bill 1128 revives provisions pertaining to absentee voting at nursing facilities, assisted living centers, or hospitals. This bill was sent to the 41st day. It will no longer be heard or move forward through the legislative process either. House Bill 1138 required update cost report information for certain community-based health and human service providers. This bill is making its way through South Dakota legislature. It would require an annual update of cost report information for community-based health and human service providers. The bill strikes language allowing DHS, or Department of Human Services, and the Department of Social Services to conduct these updates upon their subjective assessment of need based on cost report information or market conditions. This bill has made it all the way through the House, was referred to the Senate, heard there by the Senate Health and Human Services Committee, and they recommended a due pass on this bill, and it will next visit the chamber of the South Dakota Senate, where they will either pass or defeat this bill on the Senate floor. And depending on that outcome, it'll either go to the governor or be dead. So we'll see how that goes with House Bill 1138. 1167, House Bill. Annually adjust the rate for community-based providers to 100% of methodology. This is a bill that we've been working with various policymakers and watching very closely. This bill just simply states that community-based provider rates must be set to 100% of the methodology annually, methodology being the estimate of cost for providing services, and that reimbursement for this rate or this amount of cost must be 100% by the state or for that fiscal year. This bill has made it through the House side, was sent over to the Senate Health and Human Services, where it has been scheduled for hearing on Wednesday, March 1st from 7:45 to 9:45. So if you're interested in that bill, give us a call or go to that committee hearing to hear the testimony on that bill. House Bill 1174. Revise civil commitment procedures for offenders with developmental disabilities. This defines criteria of immediate danger of physical injury to self and others. It also defines the scope of offenses for which civil commitment can be sought after a dismissal of a charge. This bill has been amended a bit through discussions between the prime sponsor and the Office of the Governor. This is a permissive bill that is meant to provide supports to individuals who need those supports when they've gotten in trouble for some crime of violence, and the alternative to a civil commitment may be incarceration. So it's one that we're working with the prime sponsor. We're working with different individuals to make sure that people are protected and that they received the appropriate supports that they need to allow them to continue to live in the community as opposed to being incarcerated or sent elsewhere. This bill has been scheduled for hearing. It will be heard on Wednesday, March 1st from 7:45 to 9:45 in room 412 at the Committee for the Senate Health and Human Services. House Bill 1195. Continue enhanced and transitional rates for community services and support providers. This bill was sent to the 41st day by the House Committee on Appropriations. There was an effort to submit a substitute motion of due pass. That motion failed, so this bill is dead in the House Committee on Appropriations. House Bill 1217, modify the requirements for eligibility to vote by absentee ballot. This bill was sent by the House Local Government Committee to the floor of the House of Representatives, where it failed. It was the subject of a split vote, 35 yeas, 35 nays. There was a vote to reconsider. That vote was reconsidered, retaken, and there it failed yet again the next day on 30 to 39. So this bill died on the floor of the House of Representatives. House Bill 1218, amend documentation requirements for emotional support animals in a rental dwelling unit. This is generally a language cleanup, but it limits that supporting documentation for an emotional support animal if you want to have one in your apartment or a rental home. That documentation needs to come from a healthcare provider licensed in this state. That was the intent of the bill, but the House Commerce and Energy Committee deferred it to the 41st day, and it has died in committee. House Bill 1240, amend provisions addressing guardianships and conservatorships. This is a really interesting, really powerful piece of legislation that really affects people who are either the subjects of a petition for guardianship or receive the services of a guardian. This has made it all the way through the House of Representatives and has been sent over to the Senate, where it was referred to the Senate Judiciary Committee. It has not been scheduled for hearing yet, but as you can see, there is significant changes that have been made in this bill. I'd really encourage anybody that's interested in these issues to look up the 2023 legislation on the LRC website, find House Bill 1240, and go through just exactly what sort of language that this bill proposes to add to the process. I think there's really good protections being placed in here for people subject to guardianship petitions and who are currently protected persons under these legal arrangements. If you have any questions over this bill, I'd like to talk a little bit more about what it proposes to do, or you'd like to be more prepared to go up and testify on this bill, please contact Disability Rights South Dakota, and we'd love to talk to you about the specifics of what this legislation purports to do. House Concurrent Resolution 6002 to encourage the Executive Board of the Legislature to continue researching childhood mental health and mental health services available to children in this state. This bill has been tabled by the Senate Health and Human Services Committee. That means that they've kind of set it aside. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's dead, but if no more action is done on this bill, it will basically languish and not move forward in any way. So it's been set aside, not killed, not sent forward, may or may not get back to it by the end of this legislative year. Conversely, House Concurrent Resolution 6003, encouraging the Board of Legislature to authorize the interim legislative study of long-term care services for veterans regardless of disability ratings and to develop a long-term care plans for VA-operated, purchased, and subsidized long-term care services. This bill has been sent to the 41st day. So while this resolution was non-binding and was more of an encouragement to the board, executive board of the legislature, ultimately it was deferred and killed by the Senate Military and Veterans Affairs Committee. Senate Bill 1. Very first Senate bill proposed or put up this legislative year. Must be a pretty hot item because it has not yet made it through the legislative process. You can see here that this bill is to modify debilitating medical conditions for medical cannabis use. This bill would define qualifying medical conditions for medical cannabis use under law. Previously, the Department of Health would add conditions that would be qualifying conditions for prescription of medical cannabis, or South Dakota residents could petition the Department of Health to have particular conditions added to that list. What this bill and the language within this bill does is that it would define a specific list of conditions that could be eligible for prescriptions and remove whatever authority that the Department of Health can have in affecting that list. This bill has made it through all the way through the Senate and has now been referred to the House Health and Human Services Committee, where it's been scheduled for hearing on Tuesday, February 28th from 7:45 to 9:45 in room 412. Senate Bill 2, revise Department of Corrections reporting requirements concerning abuse and neglect of individuals in private contracted facilities. This bill has made it all the way through the legislative process and has been signed by the governor. Senate Bill 4, modify a court's authority to commit habitual juvenile offenders to the Department of Corrections. You can see here that this has had a long journey through the South Dakota legislature so far. Of course, it started with the Senate Judiciary Committee, where it was amended. That means changed a bit by the committee. And then it was passed as amended by that committee. Then the Senate chamber motioned to amend this this legislation. That was passed as amended. That was sent over to the House Judiciary Committee, where it was again amended. This has kind of been a long process for this bill, but I'm encouraged by some of the amendments that have recently occurred. What this does is it defines a criteria or provides some protections for kids that may be adjudicated and sent to the Department of Corrections or to JDC. It says that before a kid can be sent there, the Department of Corrections has to be found to be the least restrictive alternative, and it has to be a certain type of crime, and that the child has previously been adjudicated delinquent for at least 3 separate events or separate delinquent acts in the past 12 months. So this is continuing to move forward. We'll see how it does in the House, on the House floor here coming up. Senate Bill 6, authorize community response teams to recommend alternative community-based resources for children alleged to be delinquent and children alleged to be in need of supervision prior to adjudication. This bill adds representative of the school district as a required member of a community response team that a court may ask to seek recommendations for community-based interventions and rehabilitative resources prior to the disposition of that kid to the Department of Corrections. So if there is an interdisciplinary team that's formed and sought by the court to find other alternatives to sending somebody to JDC, that team has to include a representative from the school. So I think that's an important perspective, and that has made it through the Senate side of the House and was sent over to House Judiciary, where it was passed uncontested, placed on the consent calendar of the South Dakota House of Representatives, but it passed the House of Representatives, but it was contested, passed through with 67 yeas and 2 nays. So will soon be sent to the governor for a decision on her desk. Senate Bill 7, clarify emergency commitments of severely mentally ill persons by appropriate regional facilities. This bill has been signed by the governor. Senate Bill 9, modify discharge notice procedures applicable to developmental disabled persons. This also has been signed by the governor. Senate Bill 10, expand certification options for interpreters for the deaf. This was also signed by the governor. This is not a big surprise. We anticipated that this was supported pretty much entirely from the deaf community and from the Department of Health and Human Services. Department of Human Services. So this made it through pretty much unscathed all the way through the legislative process, and now will become law. Senate Bill 37, revise provisions pertaining to the South Dakota School for the Deaf. This is really a cleanup. Again, same thing, pretty clean, pretty easy process to get this through, and it's been signed by the governor. Senate Bill 64, repeal provisions related to the Jail Mental Health Screening Pilot Program and Oversight Council. This bill eliminates the Jail Mental Health Pilot Program and its Oversight Council reporting requirements. This was a pilot program that was instituted but never really took off. The language cleanup returns these responsibilities back to the various county jails, which, according to Senator Duhamel, are already doing this function. So it's kind of a cleanup, revising the law to its previous state to reflect the abandonment of a pilot program that never really got legs, that never really was implemented to the fullest degree. So this bill has been made it through the Senate and was sent over to the House Judiciary Committee, where it's been scheduled for hearing on Wednesday, March 1st in room 413 from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. So if you're interested in this issue, check that one out. Senate Bill 91, revise certain provisions regarding the crime of rape and provide a penalty therefore. This bill is being closely watched by the South Dakota Network Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault. It adds language to the statute defining rape to say that a perpetrator of such act must know or reasonably should know that a victim lacks the capacity to give consent to the sexual activity. What this may end up doing is creating an enhanced burden of proof for the state to prosecute the crime of rape committed against a person of diminished or mental capacity, because it'll have to show that the person knew or should have known that, in fact, that person did have diminished capacity or was unable to consent. But nevertheless, that's the concern or what this bill may do. This has been scheduled for hearing in room 413 on Wednesday, March 1st from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. by the House Judiciary Committee. Senate Bill 161, authorized legislative intervention into certain cases pertaining to election law. This was a hot item this year, highly contested, a lot of really interesting and spirited debates on this issue. Ultimately, it made it all the way through the Senate side. In committee, it was amended several times. It was sent to the Senate floor, where it was again amended, sent over to the House, where it was heard, and then promptly sent to the 41st state. This bill is dead in the South Dakota legislature for 2023. Senate Bill 177. Provide for the study of developmental disability service and provide for appropriation therefore. This is one that Disability Rights South Dakota has been working on pretty heavily. This bill was sent to the Joint Committee on Appropriations, where it was heard a few times. Ultimately, that committee tabled this bill, which normally would mean that the bill is dead or at least stagnant, not being worked on, not being sent forward. But there are efforts being made to address this issue ongoing. So we're keeping a close eye on that, even though it's not being discussed currently by the various Senate chambers, joint appropriations, or on the floor. So still keeping an eye on that, though it has been tabled. Senate Bill 206, clarified good cause for the purpose of continuing an involuntary commitment hearing. This bill has made it through the Senate, has been sent over to House Judiciary Committee, where it's been scheduled for hearing. It will be heard on Wednesday, March 1st in room 413 from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. This bill just states that awaiting the completion of an independent examination is provided for South Dakota Codified Law Section 27A-10-5 is not good cause for continuation of a hearing under this title. So if you're just under a commitment order and or on a hold, and you're just waiting for an independent evaluation, and you continue to wait and you continue to wait, that's not a good enough reason to continue that process. You have to be released. Senate Bill 208. Require financial institutions to report on exploitation of an elder or an adult with a disability. This, interestingly, was tabled by the prime sponsor. You know, it was an idea that the sponsor had to try to protect people against financial exploitation. The more that it was discussed, the more that it was identified that there are protections in place that could be ameliorative, that people just need to be better informed and be educated on those protections so that they can take the proper steps to be able to protect people from scams and things like that. So I know that the prime sponsor stated that he's been able to learn more and let various law enforcement agencies know of their ability to step in when they hear about different issues in the community. So it was found that this legislation was probably not necessary and would perhaps even cause fairly significant conflicts with federal law that would complicate things. So he motioned to, or asked that the committee table this bill, and they did so unanimously. And so we likely won't be seeing much more from Senate Bill 208 this year. And that's it. We made it through the entire list of all of our House bills, Senate bills, and resolutions once again for this year. If you have any questions over any of these items that I discussed today, or like to discuss them in more depth, please give us a call. We continue to spend time up at the Capitol to discuss matters of interest with legislators that affect people with disabilities in South Dakota. So if you see us up there, please don't hesitate to stop and talk with us there.